The air over Jerusalem trembled with heat and dust, as though the earth itself held its breath. Pilgrims staggered along blood-stained roads, their faces lined with exhaustion, their eyes lifted toward a city that shimmered in the distance like a promise made by God. The clang of steel echoed faintly from the walls, mingling with the low murmur of prayers. In this place of holy longing and human violence, a question lingered like smoke in the wind. Can faith sanctify the sword, or does the sword always corrupt the faith that wields it? Thus begins the tale of the Knights Templar, an order born not from wealth or lineage, but from fear and devotion. They were men who chose both the cloister and the battlefield, monks in white mantles marked with a red cross that bled like a wound upon snow. To some they were saviors, to others wolves cloaked as shepherds. Their story is not one of simple holiness, but of contradiction, silence and shouting, sacrifice and ambition, faith and betrayal. In the early 12th century, the Christian world looked upon Jerusalem as both miracle and obsession. The First Crusade had torn it from Muslim control in 1099, leaving a fragile kingdom in need of defense. Pilgrims poured into the Holy Land, drawn by whispers of salvation. Yet the roads were cruel. Raiders haunted the paths. Bandits stripped travelers of their last coin and breath. The very journey meant risking death, and those who survived carried scars of both body and spirit. It was in this crucible of peril that a small brotherhood was born. Led by Hugh of Paynes, 9 knights vowed to protect the pilgrims. They took no wives, sought no lands, and pledged themselves to a cause greater than their own breath. They lodged near the Temple of Solomon, hence their name, the Poor Fellow, soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. History would shorten it to Knights Templar, but even in brevity the name carried weight. Their lives were marked by paradox. They were monks who prayed in silence, yet they also charged into battle with lances lowered. They swore poverty, yet they would become among the wealthiest powers of medieval Europe. They claimed obedience to God, yet often stood above kings and princes. These contradictions are not flaws in their tale, but its very essence. Like fire, which warms and destroys, the Templars embodied both creation and ruin. The first years were uncertain. Many questioned their legitimacy. Who were these men who claimed the authority of both monk and soldier? The Church hesitated until Bernard of Clairvaux, one of Christendom's most powerful voices, defended them. He praised their purity, their devotion, their refusal to bow to vanity. To Bernard, the Templars were holy warriors, guardians of pilgrims, defenders of Christ's legacy. His words gave them not only legitimacy, but also sanctity. Thus, from humble beginnings, the Templars grew. They built fortresses of stone, drilled in silence, and lived by a rule harsher than most monasteries. Yet even as they grew in number, they remained cloaked in mystery. What prayers did they whisper before dawn? What secret rites bound them together? To the common people, they seemed less like men and more like shadows moving across the land, wielding both sword and scripture. Their emblem, the red cross upon the white mantle, became both a sign of terror and of hope. To pilgrims it meant safety. To enemies it was a mark of unyielding resistance. Wherever it appeared, silence often followed, for men knew that the Templars would fight to the last breath, refusing surrender. Theirs was a discipline that bordered on the inhuman. Yet beneath their vows one must ask, what drove them? Was it pure faith, or was it the intoxicating taste of power disguised as devotion? Did they seek heaven, or did they seek control over earth? Perhaps both. History is rarely kind enough to give us a single answer. The Templars were not saints carved in marble. They were men of flesh and doubt, of ambition and loyalty. They believed in eternity, but they bled like all men. And it is this paradox between eternity and mortality that makes their story endure. This is not a simple chronicle of battles won or lost. It is a journey into the heart of human contradiction, where shadows cling to light and silence holds as much weight as speech. The Templars lived by vows that sought purity, yet their end came drenched in betrayal, torture, and fire. Their story begins with dust rising from roads trodden by pilgrims, with the clang of steel on holy ground, with whispered prayers drowned by the cries of war. It begins with a vow spoken before God, and it ends with smoke rising over Paris, where the last Grand Master cursed king and pope alike. Between those two flames, one of devotion, one of execution, lies a history that has haunted memory for centuries. Reflection at chapter's end. In every age, men have sought to bind heaven and earth together, to wield faith as both shield and sword. But can the soul remain unburned when it grips the hilt of steel? Or is every holy war a shadow cast by human desire? The roads to Jerusalem were more than paths of stone and dust. They were arteries of faith and fear, veins through which the hopes of Christendom pulsed toward the holy city. From every corner of Europe, France, England, Germany, the Italian states, pilgrims set out. Some were nobles seeking absolution, others peasants clutching nothing but a wooden cross. Their journeys stretched across mountains and deserts, through lands where languages were strange and dangers constant. To walk those roads was to gamble with life itself. Wolves and storms claimed many before they ever saw the gates of Jerusalem. Others fell prey to raiders who struck like shadows, leaving corpses stripped of dignity beneath the sun. The Holy Land may have promised salvation, but the journey was paved with suffering. For every pilgrim who touched the stone of the sepulchre, another lay buried in unmarked soil along the way. It was in this crucible of peril that the Templars first proved their worth. They were not kings nor lords, yet they filled a role no monarch could easily provide. Guardians of the weak, escorts of the devout. With swords unsheathed and prayers upon their lips, they rode beside caravans of pilgrims. Their presence was a living contradiction, a monk whose hand held a rosary in one hour and a blade in the next. The early chronicles speak of them less as men and more as a vision. Pilgrims wrote of white-cloaked riders appearing at dusk, their mantles bright against the shadows, their lances glinting like spears of dawn. To see a Templar was to feel that heaven itself had sent an angel armed in steel, and yet the same sight inspired dread among their enemies. Raiders who once hunted caravans began to whisper tales of the White Brothers, who fought with a fury that seemed more than human. This duality was the essence of their power: hope for some, terror for others. The Templars' vows were central to this image. They had sworn poverty, and so they asked no coin from the pilgrims they protected. Their reward, they said, came from God alone. They had sworn chastity, and so no love or family divided their attention. They had sworn obedience, and so their every act seemed guided not by human ambition, but by divine command. Such devotion inspired awe in a world where even priests were often accused of corruption. But the reality was more complex. Poverty did not prevent the order from accepting gifts of land, coin, and privilege from grateful kings. Chastity did not still the whispers that some knights strayed from their vows. Obedience did not erase ambition in the hearts of men who tasted influence. Even in their earliest days, contradiction shadowed their footsteps. Still, to the pilgrims these flaws were invisible. For them the Templars were saviors. Imagine a peasant woman clutching her rosary as desert bandits descend upon the caravan. Her screams rise above the chaos until riders in white cloaks thunder forward. The clash of steel is swift, merciless, and final. When the dust clears, the bandits lie broken, and the woman weeps, not in despair, but in relief. Such moments, multiplied 1,000 times, built the Templars' legend, and legend was as powerful a weapon as any sword. Yet protection was not merely physical. The Templars offered spiritual assurance as well. Pilgrims who walked beside them believed their souls were shielded. To die under the care of the temple was to die within God's grace, or so many believed. The presence of the knights turned fragile human beings into vessels of courage, their fears eased by the sight of white mantles in the desert wind. The roads grew safer, not safe, never safe, but safer. And that small change altered the rhythm of Christendom. More pilgrims dared the journey, carrying not only faith but also trade, ideas, and wealth across the continents. In protecting pilgrims, the Templars did more than guard bodies. They connected worlds. This role also tied the order to the lifeblood of Europe. The more pilgrims traveled, the more they donated, the more lords supported the temple. Kings began to see them as allies, and merchants as partners. Their task had begun as a spiritual vow, yet it laid the foundation for political and economic influence. One might ask, was this destiny or design? Did the Templars set out only to serve God, or did they glimpse the power their role would bring? History rarely reveals the secret intentions of the heart. What is certain is that their guardianship of pilgrims became the cornerstone of their reputation, and reputation was a fortress stronger than stone. But shadows lengthened, for as the pilgrims walked under their protection, others whispered of unease. Monks with swords were an unsettling sight to many. Should holy men shed blood? Could a man chant psalms at dawn and kill by noon without sinning against God? The contradiction was too sharp to ignore. Bernard of Clairvaux would later answer this with his famous defense, declaring that the Templar who killed did not commit murder, but malicide, the killing of evil itself. Yet, even Bernard's words could not silence every doubt. Beneath admiration lingered a seed of suspicion, and that seed, watered by envy and fear, would one day grow into accusations that destroyed the order. For now, however, the Templars stood as pillars of faith along the pilgrim roads. Their numbers grew, their influence spread. They were more than warriors. They were symbols of safety in a world of shadows. But every road leads somewhere, and for the Templars, the road of protection soon led them to greater ambition, into the heart of battle, into the halls of power, and into the contradictions that would both elevate and undo them. Reflection at chapter's end. Every journey begins with a step, but each step carries both faith and fear. The pilgrims walked to save their souls, and the Templars rode to guard their bodies. Yet one wonders, was it protection the order truly offered, or a chain that bound pilgrims' hopes to their own rising power? The clang of swords and the cries of battle may echo loudest in memory, but the true strength of the Knights Templar was not forged on fields of war. It was hammered in silence within the cloisters, the chapels, and the unyielding walls of their discipline. If the road of pilgrims made the Templars visible to the world, it was their rule that bound them into something greater than men, a brotherhood that blurred individuality into one unshakable will. The year was 1129, and the Council of Troyes had gathered in France. Here, men of the church bishops, abbots, cardinals met to decide the fate of the fledgling Templar order. At their side stood Bernard of Clairvaux, a voice so powerful that kings and popes themselves bowed before his words. Bernard did not see in the Templars an anomaly, but a divine necessity. Monks had always renounced the world, but these monks had taken an even harsher vow to renounce peace itself in order to preserve the faith. From that council came the rule of the temple, modeled in part on monastic codes but tempered with steel. It demanded silence, obedience, chastity, and poverty. Yet it also demanded readiness for battle. In one hand, prayer, in the other, the sword. Thus their lives were not simply disciplined, but divided between cloister and battlefield, chapel and blood-soaked earth. Daily life under this rule was stark. At dawn, bells summoned them to prayer. Their mantles of white symbolized purity, though each bore the red cross of martyrdom. They ate in silence, their meals simple: bread, wine, sometimes meat, but often none. They slept clothed, ready to rise in an instant. Conversation was measured, laughter restrained, indulgence forbidden. Even their horses, cared for with reverence, were symbols of duty rather than pride. At table they did not feast. They sat shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, as a brother read aloud from holy texts. The voice of Scripture replaced idle chatter. The rule forbade them from speaking without necessity, for idle words could wound the soul as deeply as any blade. Silence, then, was their companion. Silence broken only by prayer, command, or the clash of steel. The rule also shaped how they fought. Unlike secular knights, who often sought glory and ransom, Templars fought without thought of reward. They were forbidden to retreat unless outnumbered 3-1. To turn away from battle before such odds was not bravery lost, but sin committed. Thus they became known for their unwavering lines, for charges that did not falter even when doom loomed ahead. To fight alongside a Templar was to know one would not be abandoned. To fight against them was to meet a wall of flesh that did not yield. This rigidity inspired awe but also unease. To outsiders, such obedience seemed inhuman. To surrender the self so completely, was this sanctity, or was it slavery? The question lingers still as one considers the price of devotion. Bernard himself, in his famous work in praise of the new knighthood, declared the Templars holy warriors, unlike any before. "They are fearless in battle," he wrote, "for they seek no earthly prize. If they live, it is for Christ. If they die, it is for Christ." To him they were a perfect union of monk and knight, a divine answer to the corruption of secular warfare. But perfection on parchment rarely reflects perfection in flesh. Human weakness clung to them still. Brothers quarreled, disobeyed, or secretly longed for the luxuries they had renounced. Some faltered in chastity, others in humility. The rule was iron, but men are clay, and cracks appeared despite the harshest discipline. The genius of the order lay not in erasing those cracks, but in binding them together, so that no single weakness could break the whole. The rule extended beyond the individual into the very structure of the order. Authority flowed downward with absolute clarity, from the master through commanders to brothers. Decisions were communal, yet obedience was unquestioned. In battle, orders were law. In prayer, humility was law. The brother who defied either faced punishment ranging from fasting to expulsion. Even in their punishments, silence prevailed. This strictness gave the Templars a unity unmatched by other knights. In a time when feudal lords often quarreled, when knights pursued personal honor, the temple stood as a disciplined machine. 10 men could hold against 50 if their line held true, for their will was not fractured by pride. Yet, discipline can be both shield and chain. The silence that bound them also isolated them. To outsiders, their closed rituals, their refusal to indulge in worldly chatter, their severe manner, all these inspired suspicion. What did these knights whisper in their chapels? What secret oaths tied them together? Rumors began as whispers and grew in the telling, for secrecy always breeds shadow. The truth, perhaps, was far simpler. Their rituals were plain, their vows strict, their lives difficult. Yet, to the medieval imagination, simplicity seemed impossible. Men expected secrets, and so secrets were invented. In this chapter of their history, the Templars became more than protectors of pilgrims. They became an order, recognized and sanctified by the Church, forged by a rule as unyielding as the stone of their castles. They embodied both monk and knight, silence and battle cry. But this iron discipline, though it lifted them above the common knight, also distanced them from the common man. It built the foundation for admiration, yes, but also for fear, and fear, once sown, grows like shadow beneath the light. Reflection at chapter's end. Discipline can forge unity, but it can also suffocate freedom. In silence, one may hear the voice of God or the echo of chains. The Templars embraced iron vows, but one must ask, did they master their discipline, or did their discipline master them? The Holy Land was a paradox of light and shadow. Golden dawns broke over Jerusalem's domes, while crimson sunsets stained the sand with memory of blood. For pilgrims, it was the city of God. For warriors, it was a battlefield where heaven and earth clashed with merciless force. And at the center of this paradox stood the Knights Templar, their white mantles bright against the dust, their red crosses burning like wounds upon the desert air. The Templars had vowed to protect, but protection soon demanded more than guarding pilgrims. The fragile crusader kingdoms were surrounded by powerful enemies, armies of Islam, united under leaders of faith and ambition, pressed against their borders. Every stone fortress in Outremer was a heartbeat away from siege. Every caravan road a vein vulnerable to the knife. The call for defense grew louder, and the Templars answered. Their entry into the Crusades was not gentle. Chronicles speak of them riding into battle with a ferocity that stunned allies as much as enemies. Unlike secular knights, they sought neither ransom nor plunder. They did not pause to capture nobles for gold. They pressed until the enemy lay silent. For them, victory was not measured in spoils, but in souls one's own saved through devotion, and one's enemies condemned through defeat. The desert was their proving ground. Imagine a line of Templars at dawn, lances upright, horses stamping against the sand. The silence before the charge was as heavy as stone. Then the horn sounded, hooves thundered, and the earth shook beneath their advance. Their formation did not break. They struck like a wall of steel, a living embodiment of discipline. Where others faltered, they did not waver. Muslim chroniclers themselves, though enemies, spoke of the Templars' tenacity. They noted how these knights did not flee, even when surrounded, even when death was certain. Many a battle ended with Templars standing in a circle of corpses, their own bodies broken, but their vows unbroken. In their deaths, they cultivated a legend stronger than victory. Yet the sword cuts both ways. For all their devotion, the Templars could be merciless. Prisoners were seldom ransomed. Often they were executed, for the order believed sparing an enemy was sparing evil. Such acts struck fear, but also stained their image. Mercy is as much a measure of holiness as bravery, and in denying it, the Templars walked a path that raised doubts about the purity of their cause. The contradiction deepened when considering the very concept of holy war. To kill for God, was this salvation or sacrilege? To the Templars it was obedience, to others it was blasphemy. The clash of faith and steel left a question carved into history. Can violence ever be sanctified, or is every blade drawn in God's name a shadow upon his light? One defining moment came at the siege of Damascus in 1148. The Crusader armies, joined by the Templars, sought to strike at the heart of Muslim power in Syria, but alliances faltered, strategies collapsed, and the siege turned to disaster. Crusader knights retreated in shame, but the Templars held their ground longer than most, their discipline preventing total annihilation. Though they could not turn defeat into victory, they preserved enough order to prevent ruin. Another tale echoes from the siege of Ascalon. There, Templars charged with relentless courage, pressing even when allies hesitated. Their boldness inspired admiration, but it also drew criticism, for their rigidity often clashed with the flexible strategies of kings and lords. To some, they were saviors; to others, reckless zealots whose refusal to bend endangered all. Still, victories were not absent. In skirmishes along caravan routes, in the defense of castles like Gaza and Safed, the Templars proved invaluable. Their fortresses became thorns in the side of Muslim armies, their patrols deterrents against raiders. Without them, the Crusader states might have fallen far sooner. Their presence bought time, decades of it, for Christian power to cling to the Holy Land. But time, like sand, slips through the fingers. The Templars could not halt the tides of history forever. For every battle they won, another loomed, and while they fought as one body, the world around them shifted. Muslim leaders like Saladin rose with vision and unity, while European lords grew divided by pride and greed. The Templars' discipline was iron, but iron alone cannot resist when the foundations beneath it crumble. Yet for the ordinary pilgrim these political tides mattered little. What they saw were knights who did not falter. Pilgrims recorded stories of Templars standing like walls while others fled. They wrote of men who died with prayers on their lips, who seemed to embrace death as a gate to eternity. Such testimonies carved the Templars into the imagination of Christendom as holy martyrs, protectors who stood between the weak and the storm. Their blood watered the soil of the Holy Land, mingling with that of countless others. Each drop became a memory, a symbol, a shadow lingering long after battles ended. In time, those memories would shape both admiration and suspicion, for blood once spilled never washes clean. The Templars' role in the Crusades was not one of simple triumph or failure. It was one of paradox, glory, and brutality, devotion and doubt. Their discipline made them immortal in legend, but their mercilessness stained their sanctity. They lived and died upon holy ground, and in doing so, they left the question echoing still. Did they fight for God or for themselves? Reflection at chapter's end. On holy ground, every cry of battle rises as both prayer and curse. The Templars fought with faith burning in their hearts, yet their blades drew blood like any other. Perhaps the truest battlefield was not Jerusalem's walls, but the space within the human soul where faith and violence contend, and no clear victor ever emerges. Snow falls differently in memory than in life. In memory, it is pure, silent, eternal. So too did the white mantle of the Templars appear to the eyes of the medieval world, a garment of purity, simplicity, and devotion. Upon its breast burned a single crimson cross, stark as blood spilled upon snow. To friends it was a shield of holiness, to enemies it was a mark of doom. To history, it became a symbol more enduring than any fortress they ever built. The mantle was more than clothing. It was an identity. Not every brother wore white, only the Knight brothers, men of noble birth who had taken vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Sergeants, drawn from humbler stock, wore black or brown, but it was the white mantle that seared itself into the imagination of Christendom. Against the dust of battlefields, against the shadows of castles, the sight of that bright cloth was unforgettable. The red cross was not merely decoration, it was a sign of martyrdom, an emblem of the willingness to die. When a knight donned the mantle, he wrapped himself not in vanity but in a promise that his life was already forfeit. To die in battle was not loss, but victory, not shame, but salvation. In an age where men sought relics and indulgences to secure their souls, the Templar cross was itself a passport to heaven, or so many believed. The ceremony of receiving the mantle was simple, yet heavy with meaning. There was no pomp, no parade. A man knelt before the chapter, surrounded by brothers in silence. He swore his vows: poverty, chastity, obedience, and defense of the Holy Land. He pledged himself not to family nor to fortune, but to God through the temple. Then, as the mantle was draped upon his shoulders, he became something other than himself. His old name still remained, but his identity shifted. He was no longer son, husband, or lord. He was brother of the temple, bound in spirit as in cloth. That mantle carried weight. To wear it and falter was shame beyond words. To wear it and flee in battle was sin. To wear it and betray vows was corruption of the highest order. The cloth did not merely cover the body, it exposed the soul. To outsiders the mantle inspired awe. Pilgrims, upon seeing lines of white-cloaked riders, described visions of angels sent by God. Chroniclers painted them as heavenly warriors, swords gleaming beneath holy banners. In their purity of appearance, people saw the embodiment of faith in motion. But awe often bleeds into suspicion. White can symbolize purity, but also concealment. The cross can inspire devotion, but also fear. Some whispered that beneath their mantles the Templars held secrets not meant for Christian ears, tales spread of rituals unseen, oaths unknown, mysteries veiled. Why did they guard their ceremonies so fiercely? Why did their brothers live apart, cloaked in silence? The very purity of their image became a canvas for rumor. It is the irony of history that symbols intended for clarity often invite mystery. The Red Cross, simple as it was, became entwined with legend. Some claimed it was the blood of Christ, forever painted upon their garments. Others said it marked them as soldiers of apocalypse, destined to fight until the world's end. In later centuries, the cross would be tied to myths of the Grail, of hidden relics, of arcane knowledge passed from shadow to shadow. The mantle thus became both their shield and their burden. Wherever they went, it preceded them. In battle, it was a rallying cry. In Europe, it was a reminder of their power and separateness. They were not quite monks, not quite knights, but something in between, and the mantle declared that ambiguity with every step. Yet to the brothers themselves, the mantle was not myth but duty. It was hot beneath the desert sun, heavy with dust and sweat. It chafed during long rides, soaked with blood in battle, stiff with salt after days at sea. For them, it was no romantic vision, but a daily reality, an ever-present reminder that their lives were not their own. And still, they wore it proudly. For beneath its weight lay a conviction that outlasted comfort. the belief that they carried not just a symbol, but a covenant. The red cross and white mantle also carried philosophical weight. They embodied a paradox, purity tainted by blood. In their garments, one could see the central contradiction of the Templars themselves. They were men who swore to renounce the world, yet fought to control it. They wore white, yet their days were drenched in crimson. They sought salvation, yet wielded damnation. The mantle was not an illusion of simplicity. It was a mirror of complexity. In time, this symbol would outlive their order. Long after their downfall, the white mantle remained in the imagination of poets, painters, and secret societies. It became shorthand for mystery, power, and martyrdom. Men centuries removed from the Crusades still dreamed of those red crosses glowing in torchlight. The mantle was their beginning and their end. It was draped upon novices at initiation and burned upon bodies at the stake. It marked their vow to live for God and witness their deaths at the hands of kings. Through it, the Templars spoke a language of silence. No words, only symbol, only shadow. Reflection at chapter's end. Cloth can be lighter than air or heavier than stone, depending on what it carries. For the Templars, the white mantle bore purity and suspicion, faith and betrayal. Perhaps every symbol is a double-edged sword, one side shining with light, the other gleaming with shadow. The Knights Templar called themselves poor. They named their fraternity the Poor Fellow, soldiers of Christ. Yet by the 13th century, the order was anything but destitute. From the deserts of Palestine to the meadows of France, from the ports of Cyprus to the fields of England, their wealth spread like an invisible web. They swore poverty as individuals, but together they commanded riches that rivaled kings. The first gifts came humbly. A grateful pilgrim might donate a horse, a small plot of land, or a chest of coins. Nobles, moved by piety or seeking absolution, granted estates and revenues. Monarchs, impressed by their discipline, gave privileges, exemption from taxes, freedom from tolls, and the right to build fortresses. Each gift, small in itself, became part of a swelling tide. Within decades, the Templars were among the greatest landholders in Christendom. Across Europe, their estates flourished. Farms produced grain and wine. Mills turned rivers into power. Herds filled pastures. Their commanderies, small administrative centers, dotted the landscape. They were not mere soldiers, but stewards of the land, managing resources with quiet efficiency. In this, too, their discipline served them well. Yet their wealth was not only of soil and stone, it was of gold. For pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, carrying coin was perilous. Bandits could strip them bare. Pirates could seize them at sea. The Templars devised a solution: deposit money at one temple house in Europe and withdraw its equivalent in the Holy Land. In doing so, they created one of history's first banking systems. Pilgrims carried letters of credit instead of bags of silver. Kings borrowed vast sums to finance wars. Merchants entrusted them with treasures. Soon, the temple was not just a military order, it was a financial power, a bank whose influence spanned continents. To modern eyes, this innovation seems almost inevitable, but to medieval Europe, it was near miraculous. The Templars turned trust into wealth, and wealth into power. Their castles were the most visible proof of that power. Rising from deserts and hills, they were fortresses of stone, stark and unyielding. Some, like the great Cracte Chevalier in Syria, seemed carved not by men but by the will of mountains. Thick walls, deep moats, towers bristling with arches, these fortresses could withstand months, even years of siege. To pilgrims, they were sanctuaries. To enemies, They were immovable thorns. Each fortress was also a symbol. Its stones declared permanence, its towers authority. The Templars who dwelt within lived not in luxury but in discipline, yet the sheer scale of their holdings inspired both awe and envy. A monk in a cloister might live on alms. A Templar knight lived in a fortress that could defy kings. The contradiction grew sharper with time. They swore poverty, yet kings came to them for loans. They swore humility, yet their fortresses towered above towns. They swore obedience, yet they answered not to kings but only to the Pope himself. The line between poverty and power blurred until it vanished into shadow. It is here that envy began to take root. Kings who borrowed from the Templars chafed at their debts. Nobles who resented their privileges whispered of corruption. Common folk, seeing their vast holdings, doubted their vows of poverty. How could monks, who claimed to own nothing, control so much? The mantle of white seemed less pure when weighed down with gold. And yet, one must acknowledge their accomplishments. They maintained order where chaos threatened. Their financial system allowed pilgrims to travel more safely, kings to wage wars, and trade to flourish across Europe and the Mediterranean. Their castles provided safety in lands where survival was fragile. Their stewardship of wealth was not squandered in vanity, but structured into systems that endured for generations. Still, history has a way of twisting virtue into suspicion. Secrecy surrounded their accounts. Their privileges exempted them from oversight. Their fortresses seemed to many less like holy bastions and more like states within states. As their power grew, so too did the shadows around them. In the eyes of allies, they were indispensable. In the eyes of enemies, they were intolerable. For those who envied them, their wealth became proof of hidden sin. And in time, it was this wealth, not their vows, not their battles, that would draw the fatal gaze of kings. Reflection at chapter's end. Gold and stone can shield a body, but they cannot shield a soul. The Templars swore poverty, yet built wealth, swore humility, yet commanded castles. Perhaps the question is not whether they betrayed their vows, but whether wealth itself is a vow that no order, however holy, can ever truly keep. Amid the thunder of hooves and the weight of fortresses, the true heart of the Templars beat not in their castles nor in their coffers, but in their fellowship. The order was not a gathering of strangers bound by rule alone. It was a brotherhood forged in silence, sharpened in discipline, and tempered in blood. They called each other Frater, brother, and though the world saw only the cross on their mantles, within their ranks pulsed a bond that transcended mere obedience. Life in a commandery was austere but communal. At dawn, brothers rose together to prayer. They broke their fast in silence, sitting shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches as scripture was read aloud. Their meals were simple bread, wine, vegetables, sometimes fish, rarely meat. No silver plates, no gold cups, only the plainness of discipline. They slept in common dormitories, clothed, their weapons near at hand. Even in rest, vigilance bound them. Yet in this austerity lay closeness. To eat, pray, ride, and fight as one created ties stronger than family blood. Many had left behind wives, children, and estates. Within the order, their only kin were those who wore the cross. In joy and hardship, in triumph and despair, they shared everything except individuality. The rule declared that no brother could own anything. All was shared, even the simplest tool. Poverty bound them together, but fellowship made poverty bearable. On the battlefield, this brotherhood was more than sentiment. It was survival. Knights fought not for personal glory, but for the line, the formation, the order itself. A brother at your side was one who would not flee, one who would fight until his body fell lifeless. That certainty bred a trust few armies ever knew. To ride into battle with the Templars was to feel that no man would abandon you. To ride against them was to face a wall of unity. There are tales from chroniclers of brothers who, surrounded and doomed, refused to abandon each other. A knight could have fled and saved his life, but instead stood beside his companions until all lay slain. In such deaths, loyalty was not an idea, but a final act of flesh and blood. The bonds of brotherhood extended beyond battle. When a Templar died, his possessions, meager as they were distributed among the order. His memory was honored in prayer, his name spoken in chapels, his sacrifice remembered by those who survived. Death did not sever brotherhood, it deepened it. The living carried the dead as memory, and memory itself became a form of loyalty. But loyalty could also demand sacrifice of a different kind. A brother who broke the rule through disobedience, greed, or sin faced judgment not from kings but from his own. Punishments were stern, but often designed to restore rather than destroy. A man might be forced to fast, to eat on the ground, to wear chains. In the harshness of discipline, brotherhood still lingered, for the goal was not vengeance but redemption. To expel a brother was rare, and only for the gravest offenses. This brotherhood also crossed boundaries of rank. Though knights of noble birth wore the white mantle, and sergeants of humbler station wore black, both fought and prayed side by side. At table, no brother dined in luxury while another starved. In battle, a knight might depend on a sergeant to guard his flank. In prayer, their voices rose together. The order was not free of hierarchy, but within its walls the chasm of medieval society narrowed. Still, tensions were inevitable. Nobles sometimes resented serving alongside men of lower birth. Sergeants sometimes chafed at restrictions. Yet the strength of the rule and the necessity of survival smoothed many conflicts. In the crucible of war, pride mattered less than trust. It was this unity that set them apart from secular knights. Where others quarreled over spoils or honor, the Templars submitted to the collective. Glory was not for the individual, but for the order. Their victories were not carved in personal coats of arms, but in the silent, enduring presence of the Red Cross. Yet such suppression of the self carries a cost. To deny individuality is to deny much of what makes a man. Did some knights feel the weight of anonymity, the ache of forgotten names? Likely so, but their consolation was brotherhood. If they vanished into shadow, at least they vanished as part of something greater. There is a paradox here. Brotherhood liberated them from loneliness, yet bound them into obedience. It gave them strength beyond measure, yet asked for the sacrifice of self. To gain unity, they surrendered freedom. And so the question lingers, was their fellowship a gift or a chain? Reflection at chapter's end. A brotherhood forged in discipline can endure fire and blood, but at what price does such loyalty come? Perhaps the truest measure of the Templars was not their castles or their wealth, but the silent trust between men who rode together into the shadow of death, certain that no brother would ride away alone. The city of Ascalon rose like a dagger against the southern horizon, its walls bristling with towers, its gates defiant against the crusader kingdoms. For decades, it had stood as a stronghold of Muslim power, a thorn in the side of Jerusalem. Whoever held Ascalon controlled the arteries of trade, the lifelines of armies, and the fate of the Holy Land itself. To seize it was not merely conquest, it was survival. The year was 1153. The Crusader kings gathered their forces, and among them rode the Knights Templar, their white mantles stark against the desert sun. Pilgrims had sung of them, chroniclers had praised them, but here on the sands before Ascalon their vows would be tested not in theory but in fire and blood. The siege began as so many did, with walls defying men and men defying walls. Siege towers creaked forward, groaning under the weight of timber and ambition. Battering rams crashed against gates like thunder rolling across stone. Arrows darkened the sky, their hiss and thud a constant dirge. The defenders poured boiling oil, hurled stones, loosed fire. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the clash of wills. The Templars were at the heart of it. Their discipline, so rigid in cloister and camp, became steel incarnate upon the field. They manned the towers, shielded comrades, advanced where others faltered. Chroniclers record that they fought with an intensity that bordered on madness, not reckless, but unyielding, as though each man believed heaven's gates awaited him if his blood stained Ascalon's sand. Weeks turned into months. Supplies dwindled, tempers flared. The summer heat smothered armor-clad bodies. Disease crept into the camps. Whispers of retreat stirred among the crusader ranks, for Ascalon's walls held firm, and despair pressed heavier than stone. Yet the Templars did not waver. They reminded their allies that patience was a weapon, that endurance could break walls as surely as rams. Then came the fateful moment. One of the siege towers reached Ascalon's wall, its bridge crashing down upon the battlements. A breach opened a fleeting chance. The Templars surged forward. With cries that shook the dust, they stormed the gap, lances lowered, swords flashing. For a heartbeat, it seemed the city might fall in that single rush. But the defenders rallied. They swarmed the breach, driving the Templars back with fire and steel. In the chaos, the siege tower was set aflame. Flames roared upward, devouring timber, smoke choking the air. Those Templars who had crossed were trapped. Some leapt from the walls, their bodies breaking upon the earth below. Others fought to the last breath. Their white mantles turned black with soot and red with blood. The tower collapsed, and with it, dozens of Templars perished. The loss was devastating, yet it revealed the essence of the order. For the Templars did not curse their fate, nor retreat into despair. Instead, they doubled their efforts, as though the deaths of their brothers demanded vengeance. Their discipline hardened, their zeal burned brighter. At last, persistence triumphed. After months of unrelenting pressure, Ascalon faltered. Starvation gnawed within its walls, morale cracked, and surrender followed. The Crusaders marched into the city, and the banner of the cross was raised high. For a time, Jerusalem was secure again. But for the Templars, victory was stained with memory. The breach, the flames, the screams of dying brothers, these lingered longer than triumph. Their graves lay beneath the sands, nameless yet not forgotten. Within the order, their sacrifice became legend, proof that vows meant more than breath, that death was but a doorway through which loyalty passed into eternity. The siege of Ascalon etched the Templars' reputation deeper into both awe and fear. To allies, they were the hammer that would not break, the wall that did not crumble. To enemies, they were ghosts in white, relentless even in defeat, returning again and again until stone itself yielded. Yet the same qualities that inspired admiration also bred unease. Their refusal to retreat, their hunger for martyrdom, their silence in the face of loss, all seemed less like human bravery and more like something unnatural. Were they truly men, or had they become instruments, machines of faith that no longer felt the weight of mortality? The truth, as always, was more human. They mourned their brothers, even as they honored their sacrifice. They felt hunger, thirst, exhaustion, yet they chose to act as though these burdens were nothing. In that choice lay their power, and perhaps their tragedy. The siege ended, but the memory endured. In time, Ascalon would be lost again, reclaimed by Muslim forces. The sands of the Holy Land bore witness to endless cycles of conquest and loss. But the memory of the Templars at Ascalon, charging into fire, refusing surrender, became one of the pillars of their legend. For in that breach, lit by flames and shadowed by smoke, the paradox of the Templars was revealed. Knights who sought heaven yet burned in hellfire, brothers who embraced death as victory, men who turned mortality into a weapon. Reflection at chapter's end. Walls can fall to rams, towers can burn to ash, but the memory of sacrifice endures beyond stone. At Ascalon, the Templars won both triumph and tragedy. Perhaps the true victory of that siege was not the city itself, but the legend that rose from the ashes, reminding us that men can choose to live as if death were already conquered. The summer sun of 1187 blazed mercilessly upon the hills of Galilee. The air shimmered with heat, and the land itself seemed to thirst. Amid this parched wilderness rose two rocky outcrops, twin peaks shaped like horns against the sky. To the Christian armies they would become the site of ruin. To Saladin they would be the anvil upon which he shattered the crusader states. To the Templars the horns of Hattin would be both battlefield and grave. The years leading to that day were heavy with tension. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, had forged unity where once there was division. His armies moved with purpose, his cause clothed in both faith and strategy. The crusader states, by contrast, were fractured lords bickering, kings faltering, alliances fraying. Only the military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, still stood as pillars of discipline, but pillars alone cannot hold a crumbling house. When Saladin advanced into Galilee, the Christians gathered a mighty host to resist him. Knights from every corner of the kingdom marched beneath the burning sun. Among them rode the Templars, their white mantles glowing like snow against a landscape of dust. They carried with them the relic of the true cross, symbol of Christ's sacrifice, believing its presence would shield them from defeat. Faith burned bright, but thirst burned brighter. Saladin's strategy was merciless. He denied the enemy water, cutting them off from the Sea of Galilee. His horsemen harried their flanks, his archers rained arrows, his men set the dry grasses aflame. Smoke rose in choking clouds. Fire licked the heels of the crusader host, and the sun above seemed a hammer beating down. The Templars held the vanguard, grim in discipline. They urged the army forward, pressing toward the waters of Lake Tiberias, but every step grew heavier, every breath seared the lungs. Horses collapsed, men stumbled. The heat was not merely discomfort, it was a weapon, wielded by Saladin with ruthless precision. When the Christian host reached the horns of Hattin, they were trapped, surrounded, cut off from water, their lines buckled under exhaustion. The true cross stood tall among them, but no relic could quench thirst or shield against flame. The battle erupted with fury. Muslim archers loosed endless volleys, the hiss of arrows like the sound of serpents. Cavalry charges slammed into faltering crusader lines. The Templars, bound by vow, fought with the desperation of men who knew retreat was sin. They formed circles, shields locked, lances thrusting outward. Again and again they resisted, but the tide was relentless. Chroniclers tell of Templar knights fighting until their horses fell beneath them, then continuing on foot, blades red, eyes hollow with thirst. They cut down foes with unyielding resolve, but each swing grew slower, each breath shallower. Some dropped where they stood, too parched to rise again. Others pressed forward, only to vanish beneath the tide of Saladin's warriors. The Hospitallers too fought bravely. Yet the unity of the Muslim host outmatched the fractured crusaders. The heat, the fire, the encirclement all conspired to seal their fate. At last, the Christian army broke. Men fled in panic, casting aside armor, seeking water that did not exist. The true cross was seized by Saladin's men, its loss, a wound deeper than death. Kings and nobles were captured. The field became a slaughterhouse. For the Templars, there was no mercy. Saladin, respecting their courage, yet fearing their ferocity, ordered that captured Templars be executed. Chroniclers describe rows of knights kneeling beneath the sun, their mantles stained with dust and blood, their lips parched, their eyes unflinching. One by one, the sword fell. Silence followed, broken only by the wind. The horns of Hatton marked more than a defeat. It was the unraveling of the crusader dream. Within months, cities surrendered, fortresses crumbled, and Jerusalem itself fell back into Muslim hands. The shock reverberated across Christendom. Bells tolled in mourning, kings swore vengeance, and preachers called for new crusades. But the memory of Hatton lingered, as a scar that could not be erased. For the Templars, it was both curse and crown. Their valor, in the face of impossible odds, became legend. Yet their annihilation also revealed the limits of discipline. No vow, however iron, could overcome the cruelty of thirst or the cunning of strategy. They were men who fought like angels, but they died like mortals. In the quiet that followed, one wonders what passed through their minds as they knelt upon that burning field. Did they feel fear or peace? Did they believe heaven's gates opened before them, or did doubt gnaw at the edges of faith? The chronicles cannot tell us. They record only silence, and silence often holds truths too deep for words. The horns of Hattin stand still, barren and windswept, their stones whispering of that day when faith met fire and hope turned to ashes. Pilgrims pass them and feel the weight of memory. Historians write of strategy and failure. Poets write of sacrifice and doom. And through it all, the Templars remain figures both luminous and tragic, brothers who fought to the end, whose blood darkened the holy ground they swore to defend. Reflection at chapter's end. Defeat teaches more than victory. At Hattin, the Templars proved both the power and the limits of faith. Their unity held against fear, but not against fire and thirst. Perhaps the lesson is this: no man, no order, however holy, can conquer nature itself. And yet, in choosing to fight unto death, they achieved what stone and steel cannot memory eternal. Power, like fire, can warm or consume. For the Templars, forged in vows of obedience to God, the greatest trial did not always come from sword or siege. It came from the tug of war between throne and altar, between kings who sought their service and popes who claimed their souls. In that contest, the order found both its rise and the seeds of its ruin. From their earliest days, the Templars swore obedience not to kings but to the Pope himself. This independence was their shield, granting them freedom from feudal lords and protection against the whims of monarchs. Papal bulls exempted them from taxes, placed them above local bishops, and made them answerable only to Rome. To some, this made them servants of Christ alone. To others, it made them untouchable, unaccountable, a state within a state. Kings tolerated this so long as the Templars served their needs, and serve they did. Their fortresses guarded frontiers, their ships carried troops, their treasuries lent gold. Monarchs marched more confidently when white mantles rode beside them. Yet trust was a brittle thing, and suspicion a constant companion. Tensions surfaced in subtle ways, A king might borrow vast sums from the temple, only to resent the debt. A bishop might see his authority eclipsed by a nearby commandery. A noble might envy the order's privileges, whispering that no true monks should wield such power. At court, Templars were both honored guests and uneasy presences, respected for their discipline, yet resented for their independence. The balance grew precarious. Too close to kings, and they risked papal censure. Too obedient to the papacy, and they risked royal wrath. Between altar and crown, they walked a path as narrow as the blade of their own swords. In England, they served as royal bankers, holding the treasury of Henry III within their London temple. In Spain and Portugal, they fought in the Reconquista, their banners flying beside kings against the Moors. In France, they lent money to monarchs, guarded royal roads, and offered sanctuary in their commanderies. Their service was invaluable, but their independence irked. Popes, meanwhile, exalted them as holy warriors, guardians of Christendom. Yet even Rome grew wary. The Templars' immense wealth and autonomy made them difficult to control. They were obedient in word, but their influence stretched beyond papal grasp. At times, even the papacy found itself questioning whether it commanded the order or merely negotiated with it. The most delicate dance came when kings quarreled with popes, as they often did, during disputes over taxation, authority, or war. The Templars were pressed to choose sides. Their allegiance to Rome demanded loyalty to the Pope, yet their survival in any given kingdom required tactful service to its monarch. Neutrality was dangerous, loyalty doubly so. Thus, they became mediators, messengers, and sometimes pawns. They guarded treasures of both church and crown, carried letters across continents, and stood as neutral arbiters in disputes. Yet neutrality seldom satisfies ambition. To kings they seemed too papal, to popes too royal. They belonged fully to neither, and in belonging to neither, they risked becoming enemies of both. This tension was not only political, but philosophical. Who owned faith? Was it the Pope, as vicar of Christ, or was it the king, anointed and sovereign? The Templars, living between both worlds, embodied the question without answering it. Their red cross was claimed by all and trusted by none. For the common people, these struggles mattered little. What they saw were men who prayed, fought, and guarded. But whispers trickled down, rumors that the Templars grew too powerful, that their loyalty was suspect, that their vows masked ambition. Kings encouraged such suspicions when it suited them. The Church tolerated them when expedient. The order, caught in the middle, bore the weight of shadows heavier than any fortress stone. In the silence of their chapels, perhaps some brothers wondered which vow truly bound them tighter, their oath to God, or their oath to survival amid thrones and altars. For history would soon reveal that no vow, however sacred, can shield against the ambitions of kings or the needs of popes who wield crowns of their own. Reflection at chapter's end. To serve two masters is to invite suspicion from both. The Templars swore obedience to God, yet lived in a world where power wore both mitres and crowns. Perhaps the tragedy of the temple was not that they chose poorly, but that in trying to serve both heaven and earth, they became prisoners of both. Every order that grows powerful gathers shadows. For the Templars, shadows clung not only to their wealth and independence, but to their secrecy. They prayed behind closed doors, conducted ceremonies hidden from public eyes, and bound their brothers by oaths of silence. In an age hungry for story and fearful of mystery, such secrecy was fertile ground for suspicion. From it grew tales that would outlive the order itself, tales of heresy, blasphemy, and treasures beyond imagination. The truth was simpler, at least in origin. A Templar's initiation was austere. A novice knelt before his brothers, swore vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and received his mantle. Yet, because these rites were closed to outsiders, rumors filled the void. People whispered of hidden rituals of kisses on strange places of the body, of denial of Christ, of worship of idols. None could prove such accusations, but secrecy needs no proof to breed fear. By the 13th century, whispers of hidden knowledge began to spread. Some claimed the Templars had unearthed relics beneath the Temple of Solomon itself, the Ark of the Covenant, the treasures of David, or even the Holy Grail. Others said they possessed scrolls of ancient wisdom, teachings too dangerous for common faith. Chroniclers of the time offered little evidence, yet imagination did the rest. To understand why such legends thrived, one must recall the medieval mind. For common folk, the world was woven of symbol and story. Mystery was never mere absence. It was presence of the unknown. If the Templars were silent, that silence must have concealed wonders or horrors. If they guarded something, it must be treasure or truth. If they refused to explain, it must be because the truth was too terrible or too holy. And so, myths took root. Some said the Templars worshipped a mysterious head, perhaps of John the Baptist, perhaps of a demon called Baphomet. Others claimed they practiced magic, that their victories came not from discipline, but from dark pacts. Still others saw them as custodians of divine relics, keepers of the Grail, guardians of secrets passed down from Christ himself. The Order, for its part, ignored such rumors. They had no reason to explain themselves to those outside. Their silence, meant as devotion, became fuel for legend. In monasteries and courts, stories grew in the telling. Even among allies, curiosity became unease. For if the Templars did indeed possess relics, did they not wield power beyond both crown and papacy? It is possible, though unproven, that they did discover treasures in Jerusalem. Archaeological evidence is scarce, yet their name derived from the Temple of Solomon fed speculation that they had delved beneath its ruins. Perhaps they sought only stones, perhaps they found nothing, or perhaps they unearthed knowledge that reshaped their vision of faith. History offers no answer, only shadow. Yet even shadows shape destiny. The legends that clung to the Templars became part of their downfall. When accusations of heresy were later hurled against them, it was these old whispers that gave weight to lies. The secrecy that had once shielded their unity became the mask behind which their enemies painted blasphemy. But, beyond accusations, one must ask, why do such legends endure? Perhaps because humanity longs for mystery as much as it fears it. The Templars, disciplined and silent, became mirrors for the hopes and dreads of all. To some, they were custodians of divine truth. To others, servants of Satan. To both, they were more than men. They were symbols, vessels for story itself. In the centuries after their fall, these legends only deepened. Poets and mystics tied them to the Grail, to secret bloodlines, to hidden brotherhoods that shaped history in silence. Freemasons claimed kinship with them. Novels and epics transformed them into eternal wanderers, seekers of forbidden knowledge. Even today, their name conjures not only history, but myth. And perhaps that is the greatest irony. The Templars, who lived by vows of silence, have become louder in legend than in life. Their secrets, real or imagined, echo through centuries, louder than any battle cry. Reflection at chapter's end. Secrecy is both shield and snare. What we hide, others will invent. The Templars cloaked their vows in silence, and the world clothed that silence in legend. Perhaps the truest lesson is this: when men see shadows, they cannot resist painting them with the colors of their own fears and desires. The sea lapped against Acre's harbor with deceptive calm, as if the waters themselves had not yet heard of the storm that approached. Beyond the horizon, sails darkened the line between sky and ocean. Ships of the Mamluk Sultan Al-Ashraf Khalil carried warriors, engines, and destiny itself. It was the spring of 1291, and the last great stronghold of the Crusader states prepared for its final breath. For nearly 2 centuries, the Christian presence in the Holy Land had risen and fallen like waves. Jerusalem had been lost and regained, fortresses razed and broken, hope rekindled and drowned in despair. Now only Acre remained a jewel, clinging stubbornly to the Levantine coast, guarded by walls thick with stone and memory. Within those walls, Christians of every nation crowded together, merchants, pilgrims, refugees, soldiers, and at the forefront of defense stood the Knights Templar. Their fortress towered near the harbor, a citadel of stone as formidable as any in Christendom. Its walls were thick, its towers strong, its garrison hardened by years of discipline. To many, it seemed unassailable, but the Templars knew too well that no stone is eternal when armies press and kings abandon. The Mamluk host descended with overwhelming force. Chroniclers speak of 200,000 men, though numbers swell in the telling. Yet even a fraction of that would have been enough. Siege engines rumbled forward mangonels, trebuchets, towers taller than the walls they threatened. Arrows filled the sky, stones crashed upon battlements, fire spread across rooftops. Day after day, the assault thundered, and Acre groaned under the weight of doom. The Templars fought with their accustomed resolve. Shoulder to shoulder they stood upon the walls, shields raised, crossbows singing. Their discipline steadied allies who wavered. When towers collapsed, they rushed to fill the breach. When gates faltered, they formed living walls of flesh and steel. Even in exhaustion, they seemed unyielding, as if their white mantles bore not dust and blood, but destiny. Yet destiny is not always kind. The defenders fought bravely, but the Mamluks pressed harder. The city, swollen with refugees, became a cauldron of fear and hunger. Supplies dwindled, water grew scarce, hope waned. Still, the Templars would not abandon the walls. On May 18th, the final assault came. Trebuchets hurled stones that split towers, fire consumed wooden defenses, and the Mamluk army surged like a tide that would not recede. The defenders, exhausted, broke in places. Streets filled with smoke, screams, and slaughter. Mothers clutched children, merchants fled toward the harbor, knights fought amid chaos. The Templars made their last stand at their fortress by the sea. As the city crumbled, they gathered the remnants of their brothers and civilians who sought refuge. Their walls held longer than the city itself, but even stone can be worn by time and fire. Chroniclers say they fought with a fury born not of hope but of defiance, as though to fall with silence was better than to survive with shame. Negotiations were attempted. The Mamluks promised safe passage if the Templars surrendered, but trust between conqueror and conquered is brittle, and in the chaos of the fall, promises shattered. Accounts speak of massacres at the harbor, of refugees cut down as they fled, of ships overloaded and sinking beneath the weight of desperation. In the fortress, the Templars refused to yield. When the outer defenses finally fell, they retreated deeper, fighting chamber by chamber. They chose not surrender, but martyrdom. Some chronicles claim that when all hope was lost, they detonated stores of powder, collapsing towers upon themselves and their enemies alike. Whether fact or legend, the tale endures. The Templars at Acre embraced destruction rather than submission. When the smoke cleared, Acre was no more. The last bastion of crusader Christendom in the Holy Land had fallen. Its walls lay broken, its harbour silent, its streets littered with the dead. The cross that had flown above its towers was gone, replaced by the banners of the Mamluks. The fall of Acre sent shockwaves through Europe. Bells tolled in mourning, sermons thundered in grief, but few answered the call for another crusade. The age of crusader kingdoms was over. The dream of Jerusalem had drowned in the sea at Acre's shore. For the Templars, the loss was catastrophic. Their purpose, the defense of the Holy Land, had vanished with the fall of the last fortress. They still possessed wealth, castles in Europe, ships upon the seas, but their central mission had collapsed. What is an order of holy warriors when the holy war itself has ended? They returned to Europe, still disciplined, still powerful, but adrift. Without Jerusalem, without Acre, they became less guardians of faith than bankers, landowners, and symbols of a vanished era. And in that transformation lay danger, for kings and popes alike began to wonder, what need had Christendom of warriors without a war? Reflection at chapter's end. Acre fell not only to armies but to time. Every dream has its dusk, every fortress its final stone. For the Templars, Acre was both end and beginning the end of their holy purpose, and the beginning of their fate as an order too powerful to serve, yet too rootless to survive. The smoke of Acre drifted far beyond the Levant. It crossed the sea, carried on the whispers of survivors, until it reached the courts and cathedrals of Europe. There, kings and popes heard the same grim truth. The Holy Land was lost. The dream of Jerusalem had slipped from Christendom's grasp. No crusade could recover it. No fortress could hold it again. And so the Templars returned home, not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as relics of a cause that had burned itself out. Yet the order was far from finished. In Europe, they still commanded lands vast as kingdoms. Their estates stretched from Portugal's coasts to Hungary's plains, from England's rolling hills to the vineyards of France. Their farms produced grain and wine. Their mills churned. Their herds multiplied. They remained stewards of wealth, their commanderies humming with activity. Their castles, too, still loomed over the landscape. The temple in Paris stood as both fortress and treasury, a symbol of power within the very heart of France. In London, the new temple guarded royal treasures and hosted councils. Across Spain and Portugal, Templar fortresses became bastions in the Reconquista against the Moors. Even without the Holy Land, they found purpose in Europe's own wars of faith. But something had changed. The white mantle once symbolized sacrifice for Jerusalem. Now it marked men who held land and coin, who lent money to kings, who mediated disputes. The aura of holiness dimmed, replaced by suspicion. To peasants, they were landlords. To merchants, competitors. To monarchs, creditors. The mantle of purity became in many eyes a cloak of privilege. Their financial networks, honed during the Crusades, expanded in Europe. Nobles entrusted them with estates, pilgrims with donations, monarchs with treasuries. Letters of credit flowed through their system, making them indispensable in trade and politics. But indispensability is a double-edged sword. Kings who borrowed gold from the temple came to resent their debts, and resentment, like a shadow, lengthens with time. The papacy still supported them, at least outwardly. The Templars remained answerable to Rome, exempt from local bishops, but their original mission was gone. They no longer guarded pilgrim roads. They no longer defended Jerusalem. Their existence began to feel out of place, as if history itself had moved on while they remained. Other military orders, such as the Hospitallers, shifted focus toward hospitals and care for the poor. The Teutonic Knights turned their blades against pagans in the Baltic. The Templars, however, clung to their identity as warrior monks, yet had no holy war left to fight. Their silence grew heavier, their purpose more opaque, and so suspicion deepened. Whispers spread that they had become arrogant, aloof, corrupt. Their secrecy, once a shield, became a source of unease. If they no longer defended Christ's tomb, what did they guard? If they no longer shed blood for Jerusalem, why did they still exist? Kings asked these questions aloud. Nobles murmured them in courts. The common folk, who saw only the wealth of their estates, asked them in taverns and marketplaces. Even within the order, some brothers must have wondered whether their vows still carried the same weight when the Holy Land was gone. But the Templars endured, as stone endures centuries of weather. Their unity, their discipline, their wealth, all shielded them from immediate ruin. And yet, in the shadows, fate was already drawing near. For Europe in the late 13th and early 14th centuries was a world where kings clawed for power, where debt strangled monarchies, and where envy burned hotter than devotion. The Templars had returned to Europe with treasure, with fortresses, with influence, but they had returned without their sacred purpose, and in that void, suspicion and greed found fertile soil. It is in this chapter of their story that their paradox sharpened to a blade. They were both powerful and powerless, wealthy and vulnerable, respected and resented. They had survived the fall of Acre, but Europe itself would become their final battlefield. Reflection at chapter's end. Purpose is a fortress stronger than stone. Without it, even the mightiest walls crumble from within. The Templars returned to Europe with riches, but riches are poor substitutes for meaning. Perhaps their greatest weakness was not the enemies around them, but the emptiness that crept into their hearts when Jerusalem was no longer theirs to defend. In the heart of France, where the Seine wound like a silver thread through Paris, a king sat upon his throne with eyes of ice and will of iron. Philip IV, called La Belle the Fair for his striking appearance, was a monarch both admired and feared. His beauty was of marble, not warmth, smooth, cold, unyielding. Beneath that flawless exterior burned ambition vast as empire, and hunger deep as the void. Philip's reign was marked by struggle with the papacy, wars with England, and the crushing weight of debt. He taxed his subjects ruthlessly, clashed with bishops, even dared to arrest Pope Boniface VIII. His coffers, drained by conflict, demanded replenishment. And in his realm, one institution gleamed with wealth and independence: the Knights Templar. For years, the Templars had been France's bankers. Kings deposited treasures in the Temple of Paris, borrowed sums for wars, and leaned upon the order's efficiency. But reliance breeds resentment. Philip's treasury owed them heavily, and the more he borrowed, the more their influence pressed against his pride. A king anointed by God should not be shackled by debt to monks in white mantles. Pride and necessity alike whispered that their power must be broken. Yet Philip was cunning. He knew the Templars were not mere knights, but an order sanctified by the papacy itself. To attack them openly would be to provoke Rome, and so he turned to shadow, weaving webs of rumor and accusation. Whispers spread that the Templars were not holy warriors, but heretics, that in their secret rites they spat upon the cross, denied Christ, kissed one another in obscenity, worshipped idols of demons. None of these tales had proof. All of them had power, for the people already murmured of their wealth, their secrecy, their arrogance. Philip needed only to stoke the embers into flame. The papacy itself was weak in Philip's day. After the humiliation of Boniface VIII, the papal seat had moved to Avignon, within France's shadow. The Pope was Clement V, cautious, indebted to Philip, and unwilling to challenge the crown too strongly. In this balance of power, the Templars stood alone, too wealthy to ignore, too rootless to protect themselves, too bound by vows to resist the machinery of a king. Philip prepared his move with meticulous care. He gathered informants, spread rumors, instructed officials. He laid the groundwork so that when the hammer fell, it would strike not as sudden tyranny, but as righteous justice. The people would see not ambition, but purification. The Pope would see not rebellion, but necessity. And the Templars themselves, bound by obedience and silence, would see only betrayal. Yet, even in the years before their arrest, signs of doom lingered. The order had no clear enemies left to fight, no holy war to justify its existence. Its wealth drew envy. Its privileges inspired resentment. Philip saw this clearly. He did not create their vulnerability. He exploited it. Like a hunter, he waited until the beast was wounded and weary before delivering the final blow. Philip the Fair's genius lay not only in ambition but in patience. He did not rush against the order. He encircled it. He let whispers grow until they echoed in taverns, courts, and cathedrals. He let suspicion harden into expectation. By the time his net was cast, many already believed the Templars guilty, or at least capable of guilt. In that poisoned soil, truth no longer mattered. To the Templars, Philip was at first still an ally. They guarded his treasuries, lent him money, and rode at his side. They could not see that beneath his fair face lay a serpent's calculation. Perhaps some brothers suspected, for kings are seldom generous creditors, but suspicion is weak against trust, built over decades, and so they continued to serve, unaware that their most dangerous enemy sat not across a battlefield, but upon their very throne. The figure of Philip stands in history as a paradox, much like the Templars themselves. Was he a tyrant driven by greed, or a monarch preserving the sovereignty of his crown against overmighty subjects? His motives were shrouded in necessity and pride. Yet the result was the same. His ambition would strike the order like a sword across the neck. The shadows lengthened over the temple, and within those shadows, Philip sharpened his blade. Soon, Friday the 13th would dawn, a day when the order that had survived fire and desert would fall not by sword but by parchment, ink, and chains. Reflection, at chapter's end, power is seldom lost in a single stroke. It is eroded by envy, weakened by circumstance, and ended by ambition. Philip the Fair saw in the Templars not brothers of Christ, but rivals cloaked in holiness. Perhaps the deeper lesson is this: the deadliest foe is not the enemy across the battlefield, but the ally who covets your place at the table. Dawn broke over France on Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, with no sign that history would change. The streets of Paris stirred with merchants opening stalls, peasants carrying goods, priests ringing bells for morning prayers. Yet beneath this quiet rhythm, a secret had been set in motion, a royal decree sealed in silence, carried to every corner of the kingdom. At a single command, the mightiest order of Christendom was to be seized in chains. King Philip IV had prepared with ruthless precision. His agents moved through the night, delivering orders to bailiffs, sheriffs, and soldiers. Few knew the contents of the sealed letters until the moment came to open them. Inside, the command was clear: arrest all Templars, seize their property, and hold them for trial on charges of heresy. By sunrise, the net had closed. Across France the hammer fell. Doors of commanderies splintered beneath axes. Brothers were dragged from beds. Knights were bound in irons. Some resisted, bewildered by the betrayal, but most submitted in stunned silence. They had been taught obedience, trust in law, faith in God's justice. Now those very virtues became their shackles. In Paris, the arrests were most dramatic. The temple itself, a fortress treasury, guarded by men sworn to death before dishonor fell, not to siege engines, but to writs of royal authority. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, had only days earlier walked in Philip's funeral procession for the Queen. He had trusted the king, dined with nobles, prayed for France. Now he was seized like a criminal, his hands bound, his honor stripped away in an instant. The charges were as shocking as the arrests. The Templars were accused of spitting upon the cross, of denying Christ, of kissing one another in obscene places during initiation. They were said to worship idols, strange heads, demons, Baphomet. They were accused of sodomy, of heresy, of corruption so deep it mocked their vows. These accusations spread like wildfire, for they touched the darkest fears of medieval faith. The people, hearing such charges, wavered between disbelief and horror. Could it be that the holy warriors who had fought for Jerusalem were in truth blasphemers? Could the red cross be a mask for the devil's mark? Suspicion, long seeded by their wealth and secrecy, now blossomed into dread. Many whispered that they had always seemed too strange, too aloof, too powerful. To some, guilt was believable, not because of proof, but because of envy. The Templars themselves were stunned. In chains they proclaimed innocence. They had shed blood for Christ, lived in poverty, died upon battlefields. To be accused of spitting upon the cross was insult beyond comprehension. Yet the machinery of royal power left little room for protest. They were no longer guardians of pilgrims or castles. They were prisoners in dungeons, their fate bound to torture racks and inquisitors' pens. Philip justified the arrests as an act of purification. He declared the order corrupt, its sins intolerable. But beneath the rhetoric lay simpler motives: debts to be erased, wealth to be seized, rivals to be destroyed. With the Templars broken, their treasures would flow into the crown's coffers. Their independence, once guaranteed by papal bulls, would vanish beneath royal command. The Pope, Clement V, at first hesitated. The Templars were, after all, an order of the Church. Their obedience was to Rome, not to kings. Yet Philip's power pressed heavily, and Clement, bound by politics and wary of defiance, soon ordered similar arrests across Christendom. What began as Philip's scheme now spread across Europe, though not every kingdom complied with equal zeal. In the dungeons the Templars faced horrors they had never imagined. Torture wrung confessions from lips cracked with pain. Some, desperate to end their suffering, admitted to crimes they had never committed. Others resisted until death. The silence that had once been their strength became their torment, for silence under torture was impossible. and every word spoken in agony became evidence against them. From that day forward, Friday the 13th would carry a shadow in memory, a superstition born not from chance, but from betrayal. The day the Templars fell became a symbol of ill fortune, echoing through centuries. The arrests of 1,307 were not the end, but the beginning of their long death. Trials, tortures, and executions would follow. Their Grand Master would endure years in prison before facing the stake. Yet the moment of dawn on the 13th of October was the fracture point, the instant when the white mantle, once feared and revered, became a mark of shame in the eyes of the world. Reflection at chapter's end. Trust is the strongest chain, and betrayal its sharpest key. The Templars, who had trusted kings, popes, and their own vows, found themselves undone not by enemies in battle, but by allies at their table. Perhaps the lesson is this: a fortress can resist a siege, but no wall can guard against the treachery of a friend. The clang of swords had once been the Templars' music, the rhythm of their brotherhood. Now, in dungeons beneath stone and torchlight, a different sound reigned: the crack of whips, the groan of wheels, the hiss of heated irons. Once they had faced enemies across battlefields. Now they faced inquisitors across tables, quills scratching as confessions were drawn from their suffering like blood from a wound. The trials that followed the arrests of 1,307 were less trials than theatre. The charges had already been proclaimed. The verdict was waiting to be written. What remained was the spectacle of confession. Confession extracted by force, displayed as proof, echoed as truth. Torture was the instrument, fear the melody. Brothers who had ridden together into fire now found themselves strapped to racks, their joints stretched until screams split the silence. Some were suspended by ropes, their limbs dislocated. Others were pressed with weights, burned with flame, or starved in cells where darkness gnawed at the mind. The men who had once defied Saladin and survived sieges now wept under the lash, not because their faith had failed, but because flesh is fragile and pain is merciless. Confessions spilled forth, confessions that mirrored the very accusations Philip's men had invented. Some admitted to spitting on the cross, though often with the desperate plea that it was a test of humility, not denial of Christ. Others confessed to obscene kisses, to idol worship, to sins they had never imagined before chains forced the words into their mouths. Many recanted once free of the rack, proclaiming innocence anew, but the damage was done. Their words, written in ink and sealed by kings, became chains stronger than any iron. The irony was bitter. Silence had always been their vow, their strength. Now, in silence, their guilt was assumed, and in words forced from them by torment, their innocence was drowned. Not all yielded. Some resisted every question, every blow, every fire. Chroniclers speak of brothers who endured torture unto death without confession, their silence a final act of fidelity. These men became martyrs within the order's memory, though their names seldom reached the pages of royal decrees. History often remembers not the silent, but the broken. In Paris, the spectacle was greatest. Dozens of knights were paraded before the people, broken by chains and bruises, their confessions read aloud. The crowd, hearing words of heresy, gasped and crossed themselves. Fear spread like contagion. If even the Templars, the holiest of warriors, were corrupt, what faith was safe? Yet suspicion lingered too. Many wondered if these words were truth or lies wrung from agony, but the machinery of power does not pause for doubt. The Pope, Clement V, at first hesitated, uneasy with the king's brutality, but he too summoned inquisitions. eager to assert papal authority over the trials. In 1312, under Philip's relentless pressure, the Council of Vienne formally suppressed the order. No single heresy was proven beyond doubt, but the weight of accusation and confession, whether true or false, was deemed too great to ignore. The temple was dissolved. For the brothers, the consequences varied. Some were imprisoned for life, their mantles stripped, their vows rendered void. Others were burned at the stake, their bodies consumed by flames as their voices cried innocence. A few, in kingdoms less obedient to Philip, were allowed to fade quietly into other orders or secular life. But the unity of the temple was broken, its silence scattered into ashes. It is tempting to ask whether any guilt lay hidden among them. Were their rituals misunderstood, symbols misread, acts taken out of context? Perhaps. No human order is free of flaw. But the scale of the accusations, the venom of the trials, bore the mark not of truth, but of politics. Philip desired their downfall, and the instruments of power obeyed. Inquisitors needed no proof when they had chains and racks. The trials of fire burned more than flesh. They burned memory. For centuries the Templars had been praised as holy warriors, protectors of pilgrims, guardians of Christendom. Now their name was linked with heresy, corruption, and shame. The contrast was unbearable, from the highest honor to the lowest disgrace in the span of a generation. And yet, within that disgrace lay a paradox. The very severity of their condemnation planted seeds of legend. If they were truly guilty, why did they die, proclaiming innocence? If they were truly heretics, why did kings covet their gold more than their souls? If their secrets were truly blasphemy, why were those secrets never revealed in full? Questions multiplied, and from questions came myth. In the dungeons and upon the pyres, the Templars faced not only kings and inquisitors, but eternity itself. They had lived by vows of obedience. They died in the chains of betrayal. Their trials were written not in parchment, but in pain, and their voices, though silenced, would echo far longer than Philip's decrees. Reflection at chapter's end. Truth is fragile when power commands the pen. The Templars learned that fire can forge confession as easily as steel. Perhaps the deeper lesson is this: justice without mercy becomes tyranny, and silence without understanding becomes a grave where truth itself is buried. The chill of March still lingered over Paris in 1314, though the Seine flowed steadily, indifferent to the drama upon its banks. A crowd gathered, drawn by rumor and command alike. Word had spread that Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, would meet his fate that day. Men and women pressed close, eager, fearful, curious. Some came to see justice, others to see vengeance. Few, perhaps, recognized they were about to witness a legend. Jacques de Molay had been Grand Master for over 2 decades. He had seen the fall of Acre, the retreat from the Holy Land, the decline of the crusader dream. He had negotiated with kings, pleaded with popes, struggled to preserve his order when its purpose had crumbled. And now, in his final years, he had become prisoner, pawn, and finally condemned heretic. Years in chains had not broken him. He had confessed once under torture, as so many had, but later recanted, declaring his innocence. His words wavered between silence and defiance, but as the years passed, the weight of betrayal pressed harder. Still, his spirit remained unbowed. That March day, de Molay and several other Templar leaders were led to a small island in the Seine, between Notre Dame and the royal palace. Stakes had been prepared, wood stacked, torches ready. The Grand Master, aged and weary, walked slowly but upright, his mantle stripped, his body marked by years of captivity. His hands were bound, but his voice was free. When asked to confess again, to affirm the guilt that had been written into records, de Molay did what kings and inquisitors feared most. He spoke truth as he saw it. He declared, before the crowd and the sky above, that the order was innocent, that the confessions had been lies wrung from agony, that he and his brothers had served Christ faithfully, and that their condemnation was the true heresy. The words struck like thunder. Silence rippled through the crowd, then murmurs, then shouts. To hear a condemned man defy both Pope and King at the brink of death was more powerful than any confession extracted by torture. De Molay did not plead for mercy. He demanded justice not for himself, for his time had passed, but for his brothers, living and dead. The flames were lit. Smoke curled upward, thick and acrid, as fire devoured the wood stacked around him. Witnesses spoke of his calm, his gaze unbroken, his prayers rising above the crackle of fire. He did not scream for long. He endured, his figure outlined against the blaze like a shadow carved in flame. And then came the words that would echo through history. Chroniclers differ in detail, but the essence remains. Jacques de Molay called upon God to judge those who had condemned him. He summoned King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V to stand before divine justice within a year. It was not merely a cry of vengeance. It was a curse, a prophecy, a defiance that turned execution into legend. The crowd, stunned, watched as the Grand Master burned. When the fire consumed his body, his voice lingered in memory. His ashes were scattered by the wind over the Seine, but his curse remained, whispered in streets and courts. And then the prophecy seemed to take form. Within a month, Pope Clement V was dead. Within the same year, King Philip IV fell from his horse and died suddenly at the age of 46. To many, this was proof that heaven itself had answered de Molay's call. The Grand Master's final words became more than defiance. They became vindication. From that day, Jacques de Molay ceased to be merely a man. He became a martyr, a symbol, a ghost haunting the memory of kings and popes. To his enemies, he was silenced. To history, he spoke louder than ever. The fire that was meant to erase him became the fire that immortalized him. The execution of Jacques de Molay marked the end of the Templar order in flesh, but not in spirit. His curse, whether divine or coincidence, ensured that the story of the temple would never fade into quiet oblivion. Legends grew that the order had survived in secret, that his death was only the beginning of transformation. In the centuries that followed, his name would be invoked by Freemasons, revolutionaries, poets, and mystics. Some would claim descent from his last command. Others would call him a prophet of justice, a reminder that tyranny cannot bury truth forever. Whatever the reality, Jacques de Molay stood at the threshold of death and turned execution into eternity. Reflection at chapter's end. Fire consumes flesh, but not memory. Jacques de Molay died bound in chains, yet his last words unbound him from silence. Perhaps the lesson is this: power may crush the body, but truth, once spoken, burns longer than any stake. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay on the Ile de la Cité did not end with smoke drifting over the Seine. Fire leaves ash, and ash is fertile soil for legend. From the ruins of the Templar order, its lands seized, its brothers scattered, its leaders dead, there arose stories whispered in taverns, sung in ballads, inscribed in chronicles, and embroidered by centuries of imagination. The immediate fate of the order seemed clear enough. In 1312, the papacy had formally dissolved it, transferring many of its properties to the Hospitallers. In practice, kings and nobles seized what they could. Some brothers were absorbed into other orders, others slipped quietly into lay life. A few fled to lands where royal decrees carried little weight, such as Scotland or Portugal. The order itself, once a vast institution spanning continents, crumbled into fragments. But memory, unlike castles, cannot be seized by decree. And memory of the Templars was not one of defeat, but of mystery. How could an order so holy, so powerful, fall so completely? To many, the official story that they were heretics and sinners seemed unsatisfying, even false. In that gap between truth and belief, legend bloomed. The first legend spoke of survival. Some claimed that entire companies of Templars had escaped Philip's grasp, vanishing into forests, mountains, or distant lands. In Scotland, tales spread that they fought beside Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn, turning the tide of battle with ghostly riders in white mantles. In Portugal, the Order of Christ was founded soon after, inheriting Templar lands and, some whispered, their hidden traditions. To those who longed for their return, the Templars had not died, they had merely gone underground. Others spoke of hidden treasures. The Templars had been wealthy beyond measure. Surely not all their gold could have been seized. Rumors spread of treasure caravans smuggled away before the arrests of vaults beneath the temple in Paris left empty by the time Philip's men arrived. Some said they had spirited relics out of the Holy Land long before Acre fell. Fragments of the True Cross, the Ark of the Covenant, the Grail itself. These treasures, people claimed, were hidden still, guarded by shadows. And then there were the darker whispers, that the Templars had indeed practiced secret rites, but not those invented by their enemies. Instead, they had preserved arcane knowledge, teachings too dangerous for the Church. Some said they had uncovered wisdom beneath the Temple of Solomon, mysteries of creation, of heaven and earth. Others accused them of heresy not because of corruption, but because they had glimpsed truths the Church feared. The Grail legend, entwined with Arthurian tales, soon embraced the Templars. Poets and mystics imagined them as guardians of the chalice of Christ, the vessel of eternal life. In this telling, their downfall was not corruption but sacrifice, a disappearance into secrecy to protect what could never be revealed. The order became less a historical reality than a mythic archetype. Warriors of the sacred, betrayed by worldly powers, surviving in silence to guard eternity's secrets. Centuries passed, and the legends multiplied. During the Renaissance, secret societies claimed descent from them. In the Enlightenment, Freemasons wove Templar imagery into their own rites, declaring spiritual kinship. In revolutions, rebels invoked the Templars as martyrs of tyranny, betrayed by church and crown alike. In every age, the order's memory was reshaped to suit the fears and hopes of the present. Even the supposed curse of Jacques de Molay became legend. When both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV died within a year of his execution, many saw divine justice. Later, chroniclers embroidered the tale, portraying de Molay as a prophet who summoned his enemies before God's throne. Whether coincidence or providence, the story endured, adding to the aura of mystery. The irony is sharp. In life, the Templars had been bound by silence, their rituals hidden, their words few. In death, they spoke louder than ever, not by their own voices, but by the countless tongues that wove stories around them. Their very absence became a presence, their destruction a rebirth into myth. To historians, the truth is elusive. Documents tell us of wealth, battles, trials, and flames. They do not tell us of grails or secret wisdom. Yet to dismiss the legends entirely is to miss the deeper truth, that humanity craves mystery as much as it craves certainty. The Templars, shrouded in secrecy and betrayed in fire, became a vessel into which centuries poured their longings for justice, their dreams of hidden truth, their fascination with the boundary between faith and power. Thus, the Templars lived on, not in castles, not in commanderies, not in the Holy Land, but in memory, memory that refuses to die. Their ashes were scattered, yet from those ashes rose a forest of legends, taller than any tower they ever built. Reflection at chapter's end. Ashes are not the end, they are beginnings. The Templars perished in fire, yet their silence birthed stories louder than any battle cry. Perhaps the lesson is this: when men destroy a body, they cannot destroy the idea it carried. In shadows, legends grow, and sometimes legends endure longer than truth itself. History remembers in layers. Beneath the dates of kings and battles lie echoes, whispers that shape culture long after swords have rusted. The Templars, though extinguished as an order in 1312, became more than men. They became a symbol. Their echo resounded not only in chronicles and legends, but in architecture, literature, secret societies, and even the quiet corners of the human imagination. Their first echo was architectural. Across Europe and the Mediterranean, Templar churches and commanderies bore a distinct mark. Round churches, modelled after the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The Temple Church in London still stands, its circular nave a memory of the Holy Land carved in stone. These round sanctuaries reminded worshippers not of local soil, but of distant Jerusalem, binding Europe to the memory of crusade. Fortresses, too, left their imprint, thick, walled, austere, pragmatic. Many still rise over hills and rivers, silent sentinels of a vanished brotherhood. In Spain and Portugal, their legacy endured through continuity. The Order of Christ in Portugal inherited much of their land and structure, later guiding voyages of discovery. When caravels set sail into uncharted oceans, the spirit of the Templars, disciplined, secretive, global, sailed with them. In this way, their influence helped carry Europe not eastward to Jerusalem, but westward to the New World. Their second echo was cultural. Medieval chroniclers could not forget them, whether in praise or condemnation. In chansons and epics, they appeared as paragons of loyalty, or as ominous figures cloaked in shadow. Over time, poets and novelists seized their legend. In Dante's Paradiso, warriors of faith are exalted, shadows of the Templars among them. Later, Sir Walter Scott and the Romantic poets reshaped them into tragic knights, both holy and doomed. In the modern age, novels, films, and games revived their image yet again. They became guardians of the Grail, keepers of secrets, conspirators in hidden histories. From pulp adventure to Hollywood spectacle, their red cross continued to blaze. In every telling, fact and fiction blurred, but the fascination never waned. Their third echo was philosophical. The Templars embodied contradictions: monks who killed, paupers who grew rich, servants of God who defied kings. Philosophers and theologians returned to their story as a mirror of humanity's struggle with power and purity. Were they holy warriors or victims of ambition? Was their destruction justice or tyranny? The questions mattered less for their answers than for the light they shed on the eternal dance between faith and authority, truth and myth. Their fourth echo was secretive. In the centuries after their fall, new brotherhoods claimed descent from them. Freemasons in particular wove Templar imagery into their rites, presenting themselves as heirs to ancient wisdom. Whether truth or invention, the association granted mystique, rituals of secrecy, symbols of swords and crosses, invocations of lost brotherhood all echoed the temple. Some believed the Templars had survived in hidden form, guiding history from shadows. Others saw only myth made useful by men seeking legitimacy, yet the echo itself was powerful, shaping how generations understood the interplay of secrecy and truth. Their final echo was within memory itself. The phrase, Friday the 13th, carries a superstition of ill fortune traced to their arrest in 1307. Even in popular culture, where history is forgotten, the Templars linger like ghosts, haunting calendars, novels, and films alike. Their name remains shorthand for mystery, their image a symbol of both devotion and betrayal. Why do they endure? Perhaps because their story holds all the elements that bind human imagination: faith and violence, loyalty and betrayal, purity and corruption, triumph and downfall. They are not merely knights in history books. They are archetypes. In them, we see the fragility of power, the danger of secrecy, the resilience of legend. Their echoes remind us that no order truly dies. Stone crumbles, but ideas adapt. Mantles burn, but symbols blaze anew. The Templars live on not in flesh, but in every story told about them, every secret whispered in their name, every reflection on the paradox of men who sought to bind heaven and earth with sword and prayer. Reflection that chapters end, echoes fade, but they also linger, reshaping themselves in each age. The Templars no longer guard pilgrims or fight crusades, yet their presence endures in stone, in story, in superstition. Perhaps the lesson is this: when men live by paradox and die by fire, their memory cannot vanish. It becomes echo, and echo becomes eternity. The story of the Knights Templar begins in dust and ends in flame. It begins with pilgrims stumbling along roads to Jerusalem, seeking salvation, and knights who vowed to guard them with both prayer and sword. It ends with Jacques de Molay bound to a stake, his white mantle consumed by fire, his last words defying both king and pope. Between those two images, dust and flame, stretches 2 centuries of paradox, holiness and suspicion, loyalty and betrayal, devotion and destruction. The Templars' journey is not one of simple rise and fall, but of transformation. They were born poor, sworn to poverty, yet became among the wealthiest powers in Europe. They vowed obedience, yet stood above kings, answerable only to the Pope. They swore chastity and humility, yet provoked envy through their castles, ships, and treasures. They were knights who prayed, monks who killed, guardians who themselves became feared. Their contradictions were their essence. To love their story is to wrestle with paradox. Were they saints or sinners, victims or conspirators, holy warriors or greedy bankers? History offers fragments of answers, but legend fills the rest. And yet, beneath the layers of suspicion and myth, one truth endures: they believed. The Templars lived as if God's presence surrounded them, as if every prayer was heard, every battle sanctified. They believed that their sacrifice was service, that their unity was holiness, that their deaths were gateways to heaven. Whether their faith was pure or corrupted, it was fierce, and in that fierceness lies the core of their endurance. The Templars' legacy reaches further than their downfall. Their financial innovations laid the groundwork for modern banking. Their fortresses inspired military architecture. Their myth inspired centuries of literature, secret societies, and cultural memory. They became symbols not just of history, but of humanity's hunger for mystery. Even their destruction carries meaning. The betrayal by Philip the Fair, the compliance of Pope Clement V, the spectacle of confessions under torture, all these reveal how power consumes those who grow too strong, even when clothed in holiness. The Templars remind us that faith does not shield against politics, and purity does not protect against envy. But there is another lesson, quieter yet deeper. The Templars lived by symbols, the red cross on white cloth, the mantle that bore both purity and blood. Symbols are fragile, yet they endure longer than stone. The cross and the flame remain the cross they bore into battle, and the flame that consumed them, one symbol of devotion, the other of destruction. And perhaps it is fitting that both remain inseparable, each defining the other. Today, when we speak of the Templars, we are not merely recalling a medieval order. We are recalling the questions they raise. Can violence ever be holy? Can wealth coexist with purity? Can loyalty survive betrayal? Can truth survive torture? These questions echo not only in their history, but in every age where power and faith collide. The Templars died as an order, but they live as a mirror. In them we see both the heights of human devotion and the depths of human ambition. We see courage that rode into fire and cruelty that betrayed brothers in silence. We see not saints carved in marble, but men of flesh and blood, flawed and faithful, remembered because they carried contradictions too vast to vanish. And so their story ends not in silence but in echo. The Knights Templar, guardians of pilgrims, martyrs of politics, legends of mystery, remain with us still in stone churches, in whispered legends, in novels and films, in the superstition of Friday the 13th, in the very idea that men can bind themselves to something greater than life. Final reflection: the cross and the flame are eternal. One reminds us of faith, the other of betrayal. Together, they teach that every vow carries risk, every power carries shadow, and every brotherhood carries within it both salvation and ruin. The Templars were not destroyed by Saladin, nor by poverty, nor by defeat alone. They were destroyed by the weight of their own contradictions, by being too holy for kings and too powerful for popes. Yet even in destruction, they triumphed. For no king, no pope, no fire could erase their memory. And so we ask, even now, were the Templars undone by their enemies, or by the very destiny they embraced? The answer lies not in stone or parchment, but in the silence between cross and flame.